All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Let's begin. So first of all, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this evening's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilsim Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Freeman, in creation of the yahrzeit of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Rav Chaim Rafael Zichron Livracha, Semi and Malka Esterson, in memory of their parents, Yitzchok Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rafael Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, in memory of their dear friend, brave soldier, beloved husband and father, Naftali Yonah, Shemi Kom Damo, Ben Beatrice Miriam, and Daniel Yigal. And our shir sponsors for tonight, Abe and Susan Zwani, Le'ilui Nishmas, Susan's mother, Sarah Fega Bas Dov Ber HaKohen, and Mrs. Engelsberg, in mention of the yahrzeit of her brother, Asher Nachman Ben Shaul, Zichron Lebrach. We hope to the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Lav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, the merit Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring our hostages home, B'Shalom and B'Karov, and our holy soldiers will be successful, B'Chol Ma'aseh Yedehem. And with that, let us begin. So, Meretz Hashem, our avodah tonight is to Meretz Hashem prepare for Chanukah. And what a schus Baruch Hashem to begin our preparation on Erev Chanukah itself. Sorry, 1 second here. Okay, good. So let's begin with number one. Gemara Masechah Shabbos. And the Gemara says as follows, My Chanukah. What is Chanukah? So the Gemara says, the Tana Rabbanon, B'chafei b'Kislev, Yomei de Chanukah Timni Inun. So again, this is a famous Gemara. We do this Gemara every single year in our pre-Chanukah Shir, or in our Chanukah Shir. What is Chanukah? On the 25th of Kislev, the Yom Tov of Chanukah is 8 days. You're not allowed to fast on these days. You can't eulogize on these days. Why? When the Greeks, Syrian Greeks, entered into the Beis HaMikdash, they defiled all of the oil that was found inside of the Beis HaMikdash. And when the Chashmonaim, the Maccabim, family of valiant Kohanic soldiers, overcame the Greek army, Badku v'lo matzu elapach echad shal shemen shayamunach b'chosamo shal kohen gadol. They searched, and they were only able to find one cruse, one little jug of oil that was intact, that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on it, that was ritually pure. And there was only enough oil left to last for one day. A miracle occurred. Miracle occurred, and one little jug of oil lasted for 8 days. L'shana acheres, in a subsequent year, kavum va'asum yamim tovim b'halal va'odah. In a subsequent year, the rabbis made it into a holiday. Interesting, again, we'll come back to this in just a little bit, but the Yom Tov of Chanukah was not immediately accepted as a Yom Tov, or not immediately made into a Yom Tov immediately upon the miraculous events, but rather l'shana acheres, in a subsequent year, it was established as a Yom Tov. How does the Yom Tov identity of Chanukah manifest itself? Yamim Tovim, it's a Yom Tov, b'halal ve'odah. Halal means? Praise. Right? What does halal mean? Halal. So we say halal, u'bahodah.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Right? What does it mean, thanks? It means that again, in Shemona Esrei, in the bracha of Modim, we add in alanisim and bimei matisyo. So this is how we mark the Yom Tov of Chanukah. Obviously, again, we light the menorah, but again, the way that the Yom Tov identity manifests itself is that it's a Yom Tov, but how is it a Yom Tov? B'halal and b'hodah. Okay, now the Torah makes an interesting observation. The Torah number 2 says as follows: V'haya Omer Harami Rotenberg Zal Sheriboy Hasudos Shemar Ben Bahem Sudas Harashus. The interest of the Maram of Rotenberg made an interesting observation. He said it's common for people on Chanukah to have sudos, to have celebratory festive meals. And the Maram of Rotenberg said, just understand, those meals are not obligatory. They're not obligatory, but rather, again, it's what's called the Sudas Rishus. If you want to, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Why? Shelo kavu ela lahalel ulahodos velo mishte v'simcha. Because the Ram makes a fascinating observation, that the Yom Tov of Chanukah was not established, or these days were not established as days of mishte v'simcha. They were not established as days of physical celebration. Mishte means, again, partying, right? Which means, again, eating, drinking, and simcha, and celebration. Chanukah. So what is the Ma'aram? What's bothering him? What's bothering him? In general, what's the hallmark of every single Yom Tov? Eating. So if you take a look at number 3, right? Torah tells us, right? Eating. Well said, right? Torah says, "V'samachta bechagecha." You are to rejoice on your Yom Tov. Ato ubincha bitecha avducha v'amascha v'alevi v'ager v'ayosem v'amana asher b'sharecha. When Yom Tov comes, there's a mitzvah of simcha, a biblical obligation. Now, obviously, this is talking about biblical Yom Tovim, Chanukah, Purim, rabbinic Yom Tovim. But generally, the way that halacha says we mark a Yom Tov is with simcha and mishta, celebratory meals. Celebratory meals, again, usually an obligation to have wine as part of those meals as well. So amazingly enough, the Maram of Rotenberg is quoted by the Torah, says yet Chanukah is different. On Chanukah, there is no mitzvah of mishta v'simcha. There's no obligation to drink wine. There's no obligation to have a celebratory meal. None of that applies on Chanukah. Why? Because going back to number 1, again, if you look at the underlying line, when the rabbis solidified the halachic identity of Chanukah, how is Chanukah celebrated? B'halal u'ba'odah. That's how Chanukah is celebrated. So you have a Chanukah party, go, you have a Chanukah party. But no, at the end of the day, that is not part of the halachic mandate. The halachic mandate of the day is halal and hodah. And in fact, if you take a look at number 4, the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. The Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Chanukah says, Riboy hasudos shemar bin bahem. But yet, here's what's interesting. It's so common for people to have celebratory meals over Chanukah. Right? Common for people to have Chanukah parties. Common for people to have beautiful sudos every night of Chanukah. So the Shulchan Aruch says, just understand, that's fine, but it's sudos harashos. It's not a halachic obligation. There is no halachic obligation to sit down and wash. There's no obligation, it's interesting. There is a minhag to eat milchiks, to eat dairy on Chanukah. That there is a minhag too. That's based on the story in Medrash Chanukah, how Yehudis, who was the sister of Yehuda Maccabi, the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, essentially killed a prominent Greek general by getting him to fall asleep, by feeding him dairy, by giving him milk, by giving him milchiks. So there's a custom like this to eat milchiks, but even that, there's no obligation of a meal. No obligation of a meal. He says, whatever meals we have, it's sudas harashos, shelo kavom lemishte v'simcha, because these days were not established as days of mishta and simcha. So the obvious question is, why? Just so you understand, Chanukah stands in contradistinction to every other Yom Tov we have. Every other Yom Tov we have, there is a mitzvah of mishta v'simcha. There is a mitzvah to have a meal. Again, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, biblical Yom Tovim, are bound by, again, the biblical obligation that we see in number 3. V'samachta bechagecha. Now, as much as the obligation to rejoice on Yom Tov manifests itself in different ways, the Rambam writes that everybody experiences simcha in different ways. Some people experience simcha by getting new clothing. Some people experience simcha by getting new jewelry. Some people experience simcha by eating meat and drinking wine. However you're experiencing simcha, everyone has a mitzvah of simcha. Purim is its own kind of entity, right? Because what does Purim have? We spoke about this before. What does Purim have? Purim has exaggerated simcha, right? Purim has drunkenness, right? Purim is but nevertheless, rooted in the same concept of mishta v'simcha. The only Yom Tov we have that does not have an obligation of a meal, that does not have an obligation of wine, that does not have an obligation of mishta v'simcha. Again, mishta usually refers to food, simcha usually refers to wine. The only Yom Tov that doesn't have that obligation is Chanukah. It's Chanukah. So the obvious question is why? Why is this Yom Tov separate and distinct from all of the other Yom Tovim on the calendar? So if you take a look at number 5, there's a classic answer. The classic answer is given by the Mishnah Berurah. And the Mishnah Berurah writes as follows. I'm sure everyone has heard this before. The Mishnah Berurah says, Shelo kavu mishta v'simcha el lahal hodos, v'nira tam, delo kavu kan l'simcha kimo bepurim. So first of all, what's by the Mishnah Berurah is as follows. Generally, right, when we look at our Yom Tovim, we have groupings, right? What are our two groupings? Biblical versus rabbinic. So biblical, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. Rabbinic, what do we have? Chanukah, Purim. So again, yet Purim, mitzvah of mishteh v'simcha, of celebration. Chanukah, no such thing. So the Mishnah Berurah gives a very simple yet profound answer. He says it's simple. From source number 5, second line in. Kibe Purim, haya hagzera lahashmid ulaharog es hagufos shu bittul mishteh v'simcha v'lo es hanafashos shafilu himiru daitam chas v'shalom lahaya mekabalosam. So this is very interesting. The Mishnah Berurah says, fascinatingly enough, that the way that a Yom Tov is celebrated very much mirrors what the essence of the Yom Tov was. So remember again, Purim celebrates our victory over Haman. What did Haman want to do? What was Haman's goal? Right? Haman's goal was lahashmid, laharog, uli'abed. He wanted to destroy Jews. It was physical annihilation. Remember again, Haman is from Amalek. As Jews, we have different kinds of enemies. Amalek is an enemy that is interested in complete annihilation, right? Amalek is not interested in assimilation. Amalek is not interested in theological conquest. Amalek wants one thing and one thing only, and that is to annihilate the Jewish people. As such, Haman didn't matter. You like your Yiddishkeit, you don't like your Yiddishkeit. You're from, you're not from. It didn't make a difference. Haman was annihilate everyone. As such, Purim represented a threat of physical annihilation. So because Purim represented a threat of physical annihilation, how is the victory of Purim celebrated? How is it celebrated? Through physical celebration. And that's why again on Purim, there was physical threat, and therefore again the celebration is a very physical one. Again, mishteh v'simcha. Conversely, if you take a look, still in source number 5, about 5 lines in, Masha'enke, middle of the 5th line. 1, 2, 3, fourth line, middle of the 4th line. Masha'enkein, b'maisa da'antiochos shelo gazra aleim laharod lahashmid rak tsaros ushmados kidei lahamir daitum. So remember again, what was the interest of the Syrian Greeks? What do they want to accomplish? What do they want? Assimilation. In fact, it's incredible. There's a whole Medrash Chanukah. And in Medrash Chanukah, it goes through the story of Greek persecution of the Jewish people. So remember again, the Greeks were more than happy to embrace us into their ranks. They just wanted us to give up a distinct theological culture. They wanted to Hellenize us, right? They wanted us to become part of their greater civilization. In fact, they actually thought that Jews had much to contribute. They weren't interested in the physical annihilation. They were interested in the spiritual annihilation. So says Mishnah Berurah something amazing. So Antiochus, and again, that's why again, remember, first it starts with Shabbos, and then Bris Milah. They chip away, they try to chip away at the physical or the spiritual foundation stones of Yiddishkeit. He goes on. He says, "We see this in Alanisim, right? Sorry. What did Antiochus want to do? He wanted us to forget Torah. He wanted us to violate the tenets of our spirituality. And therefore, again, if Jews would have simply gone ahead and given in to the Hellenization process, what would Antiochus have done? What would he have done? He would have embraced us, right? He would have embraced us willingly, right? He would have been incredibly happy. In other words, there would not have been a threat to the Jewish people had we been willing to go ahead and give up our spirituality. I just want to point out something incredible. It's important to understand in the Chanukah story that Antiochus was incredibly successful, right? And there were many, many Jews who were Hellenized. That's why if you notice again in number 1, the Gemara says, right, just imagine this for just a second, right? So the miracle, I don't want to spoil the story for you, but right, the little jug of oil lasted for 8 days, right? So remember, you would have thought, what would happen the moment after the little jug of oil lasted for 8 days? What would happen the next moment? Everybody would be inspired. They would make it a Yom Tov immediately then. It doesn't say that. It says L'shana Acheres, which means in a subsequent year, they made Chanukah into a Yom Tov. The Sfas Emes says, why would you wait until a subsequent year to make it into a Yom Tov? The miracle just happened. Say Maranan Barabanan, 25th of Kislev is going to be a Yom Tov. It's going to go on for 8th day. And make it that year. Why the Shana Acheres? Shana Acheres can mean a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later. The Sfas Emes says so profoundly. He says the ranks of the Jewish people were so profoundly diminished because of the successful Hellenization process that it would have been foolish to make a new Yom Tov when our ranks were so depleted. So in other words, we look at the story of Chanukah as an incredible success, as a victory, which of course it was. But it's also important to understand the tremendous amount of collateral damage that happened to the Jewish people during the years of spiritual persecution, which, just as an aside, why it's so important over the Yom Tov of Chanukah to open up your home to other people. Chanukah is a Yom Tov of Achdus. Chanukah is a Yom Tov of togetherness. Chanukah is a Yom Tov where ultimately, again, Klal Yisrael has to be together. So again, it's not our share, but especially if you know someone who's alone, or maybe you know someone who doesn't have in-town family, or someone who may be lighting by themselves, how incredibly important it is to offer an invite, not just the Shabbos. You know, it's so beautiful to invite someone over to join you for your hadlaka. If you know that they're alone, come join us for hadlaka. I got it. They don't fulfill their halachic obligation. They'll light later on at home. But to not have to do a hadlaka by yourself, to not have to have, just to be by yourself by the candles is a tremendous thing. Chanukah was a Yom Tov where we lost so many. And therefore Chanukah becomes a Yom Tov where it is so incredibly important for us to circle the wagons and to make sure that we're there for one another. In any event, back to the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mishnah Berurah says, therefore Chanukah was not a physical threat to the Jewish people, it was a spiritual one. And therefore, again, what happens? Lekach, 3 lines up from the bottom of number 5. Lekach, lo kavam ela lo halel ula hodos levad kilomar. Therefore, again, into the Mishnah Berurah says, so remember, the celebration of a particular Yom Tov really mirrors what the essence of the Yom Tov is. So if Purim represented a physical threat to the Jewish people, therefore the celebration of the Yom Tov is a physical celebration. Chanukah represented a spiritual threat to Klal Yisrael. And therefore, the celebration is a spiritual one. And that's why the Gemara says, going back to number 1, how do we celebrate Chanukah? How do we celebrate Chanukah? B'halel bo'da. That's it. It was a spiritual threat, and therefore a spiritual celebration. How do we spiritually celebrate? Recitation of Hallel, recitation ultimately again of Ala Nisim and Meimei Matisyo, both in Shemona Esrei as well as in benching. Spiritual threat, therefore spiritual celebration. Beautiful. And therefore, if you go with this approach, it makes perfect sense that there is no mitzvah of Su'udah, right? There's no mitzvah of Simcha on Chanukah, because that's what Chanukah is about. Chanukah is about a spiritual victory, and as such, the celebration manifests itself in spiritual fashion. Hallel and Hodah, Purim, physical victory, and therefore ultimately, again, physical celebration. But if you take a look at number 6, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Sechas Kol Shavrach, has a beautiful insight. The Lubavitcher Rebbe has a beautiful insight here where he writes as follows. Take a look at 6 Av. It's a little bit of a longer piece, but it's worth it because I promise you it is going to forever change the way you view Chanukah. So look what he writes. He says, Li'ar hasbira shel pnimios haTorah mekabala inyan mashmaos amuka yosef. So the Rebbe says, let's delve a little bit deeper into this. So first of all, again, just to understand, what we've just done is a beautiful and profound halachic answer. And by the way, helps us also to understand, the way Yamim Tovim are structured. Right? Yamim Tovim are structured. That if you think about it, by the way, if you think about even the regalim, right? The regalim themselves, in other words, if you associate Su'udah with physical salvation, then it makes a lot of sense. Pesach was also a physical salvation, right? Sukkot, we celebrate Chaburah who housed us in the desert, whether it's clouds, whether it's booths, also physical salvation. Shavuos, remember again, what's the most beautiful part of Torah? I'm asking you, what is the most beautiful part of Torah? The most beautiful part of Torah is the ability to endow the physical with a dimension of spirituality. So if you think about all of the regalim, they all have physical aspects associated with them, and that's why, again, their celebration manifests itself in physical ways. Purim, like we saw, physical threat, therefore physical salvation. Chanukah is the one Yom Tov where there was no physical threat, and therefore, again, only a spiritual one, and therefore the celebration is spiritual one as well. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe says there's something deeper happening over here. He said, this is absolutely incredible. He says, Su'udah. I'm in source number 6, paragraph Aleph, second line. He says, a Su'udah. What is a Su'udah made up of? Morkeves, milechem, mayim, v'yayin. Okay, it's interesting. The Rebbe says, what are the basic components of a Su'udah, of a meal? What do you have? You have bread, you have water, and you have wine. Those are the 3 basic components of a Su'udah. He says, Shloshes hadvarim halalu, romzim laTorah. Now, interestingly enough, the three basic components of a Suda all represent Torah in some way. He says, Lechem umayim, hachiyunim likiyum adam, romzim lechelek hagaloy shel Torah. So again, Torah itself is compared to bread and water. Because just like a person can't survive without bread, can't survive without water, so Torah represents that idea that a person can't survive without the beautiful spiritual sustenance of Torah. But bread and water also represent what we'll call the revealed parts of Torah. On the other hand, he says, so bread and water also represent the core components of Torah, which you have to know in order to go ahead and live a proper Jewish life. This is incredibly important, right? Torah is a manual. Torah is a manual for life. So like anything else, right? You buy something, you want to know how to use it, you have to read the manual. So what Torah is the manual for life. Without the manual, I don't know how to live an effective life. The manual component of Torah, that's symbolized by bread and water. Just like bread and water I need to survive, so too again, there are certain revealed parts of Torah that are the manual for successful living, without which I will not be able to be successful. He goes on. He says, yayin on the other hand, wine, kiyumi, simcha v'chiyus, this is beautiful. Wine on the other hand, now again, does a person need wine in order to survive? I guess it depends who you ask, right? But again, wine represents something that's beautiful, that's wonderful. But again, you don't need it. You don't have to have it. You could lead an effective life even without it. Lubavitch Rebbe posits, wine represents the additional deeper dimensions of Torah. What we call Torah's Hanistar, the more esoteric components of Torah. Sodos HaTorah, we call the Panimius of Torah. He says, Hamosifin Omek v'chiyus ba'avodas Hashem. Now, is it beautiful to delve into the deeper aspects of Torah? Is it beautiful and spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. Is it necessary? No. In other words, it's not necessary. In other words, a person can be successful in how they live even without the deeper components of Torah. Again, the bread and water of Torah, the basic, again, you just think about this. You can't live without Hilchos Shabbos. You can't live without Taras HaMishpacha. You can't live without Hilchos Kashrus. You can't live without knowing these halachas, because it's what allows us to function as Jews, as proper Jews. So that's the bread and water of Yiddishkeit. There's the wine of Yiddishkeit. The wine of Yiddishkeit is beautiful, and it's inspiring, and it's fantastic. Is it a necessary component for the manual, for successful living? No. Or it's great, and it's most definitely value added, but if for some reason you don't have it, you could still be very successful in your Yiddishkeit. But watch this, turn the page. Paragraph base. Yesh davar ravi. The Rebbe says there's a fourth component. Not only is there bread, water, and wine, but there's a fourth component. What's the fourth component? Shemen, oil. What does oil represent? Hahevdel beino lebein hadvarim ha'achirim hu. So what's the difference between oil and bread, water, and wine? Good question. What's the difference between oil and bread, water, and wine? Listen to this. He says, Shalechem mayim v'yayin efshar le'echol o lishtos kishelehem la'atzman. Bread, water, and wine could all be consumed on their own. I don't need, I'd like to have something on my bread, but I don't need it. Water, right, doesn't need anything else. Right? Wine doesn't need anything else. All of these items could be consumed on their own. Ulam, shemen eino ro'i la'achila o l'shtia kishulatzmo. On the other hand, oil cannot be consumed on its own. Elo, biyosa mu'ura v'machal machirim. Oil can't be consumed by itself. In fact, oil really is only meaningful, and oil is only helpful, or oil is only beneficial when it's mixed in with something else. Va'az hu mashbiya le'ein aruch as tamam v'goyin tanugrav. But here's what's interesting. The same oil, which cannot be consumed on its own, when it's mixed in with something else, changes everything. Right? You can have the salad, and the vegetables are all wonderful, and you add the dressing with the oil, and suddenly again it becomes a whole different thing. So that same oil, I can't consume it on my own. Yet take that oil, mix it in with everything else, and everything becomes better. Everything becomes better. So look what he writes. This is incredible. Paragraph Gimel. B'nekuda zu, with this point, ba'a lidei bitui ma'alaso hanifla shel Chanukah al kol hachagim ha'achirim shechayvu b'suda shalechem mayom mazon. And now we see the unique status of Chanukah. Chanukah has a unique status above all the other Yom Tovim, whereas all the Yom Tovim have an obligation of Su'udah, and Su'udah manifests itself in lechem, mayim, and yayin, bread, water, and wine. So remember again, which are all incredible. So number one, bread, water, wine could all be consumed on their own. And bread, water, and wine represent different parts of Torah. Bread and water, what we'll call the revealed parts of Torah, the necessary manualistic parts of Torah that you cannot live without. The wine, a little bit more esoteric. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but again, I don't have to have it. Comes oil. And what does oil represent, says the Rebbe? Hachagim ha'achirim kshurim lechalokim giluyim yosel shel Torah. This is incredible. All the other Yom Tovim that we have are much more tethered to the revealed aspects of Torah. Right? So in other words, what the Rebbe is positing, just listen to what the Rebbe is positing. When you have a mitzvah of Seudah, of a meal, basic meal consists of bread, water, and wine. Bread, water, and wine we'll call the revealed parts of Yiddishkeit. The revealed parts, again, not all the same. Bread and water, the necessary indispensable components, wine, a little bit more of the esoteric, but all the things that function beautifully and independently on their own. All those things can be consumed on their own. So all the other Yom Tovim that we have are all linked to what we'll call the more revealed parts of Yiddishkeit. And then he goes on, he says something amazing. And even the wine represents the esoteric pieces, but the esoteric pieces that are waiting to be discovered and revealed. You know, not everything esoteric is so difficult to comprehend. You just have to work a little bit harder. He says, Ulam Chanukah, shemetzainim oso ayidei shemen, mesamel es kocham shalasodos hakmusim biyoser shalatora rozin de rozin. So this is absolutely incredible. Says Rabbi, do you know what Chanukah represents? And by the way, this answers a question that I think bothers many of us each and every year, which is the entire Yom Tov of Chanukah has this incredible emphasis on the oil and absolutely no emphasis on, what was the other miracle? The war, which is just fascinating. The only mention we make about the war is again in Al Anisim, we say that Chash Baruch Hu delivered Rabim biyad ma'atim. Right, Giborim biyad chaloshim. Right, so he says he delivered the many into the hands of the few. But Chanukah, the observance of Chanukah, is all about the oil. Says the Lubavitch Rebbe something absolutely amazing. Because what does oil represent? Oil, says the Rebbe, represents what he calls misamel es kocham shel sodos hakemusa biyoser. It represents the secrets, the energy, the power that exists within that is so hidden that sometimes we forget that it even exists. There are different forms of sustenance, says the Rebbe. There's bread, there's water, there's wine, and it's all beautiful. Bread and water, revealed kochos. Wine, a little bit more of hidden powers, hidden abilities, but still very discoverable. And then there's another level, and that other level is oil. And what oil represents, you see, oil by itself, when you see it, you don't even know what to do with it, because by itself, you can't do anything with it. But if you know how to use oil, then what does oil do? If you know how to use oil, it makes everything better. The Rebbe says oil represents the deepest strengths, the deepest kochos, the deepest abilities that we possess inside of ourselves. Things that we never knew we even had. Everyone knows about their bread, and everyone knows about their water. And the truth is, most of us even know about our wine, even though the wine is a little bit more hidden. But your oil, your shemen, that's what exists inside of you. That is so profound. It's the most powerful part of who and what you are. And it's often the part of the self that remains fundamentally undiscovered. And the Rebbe says in paragraph Dalet, he says, actually, you know, we'll leave this piece for later on. So the Rebbe says something incredibly profound. And by the way, you see this theme about Chanukah amongst many different incredible thinkers, Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook has this same idea. He says that the entire Chanukah story is a metaphor for the human condition. He says, what happens? What was the Chanukah story? What was the Chanukah story? Right? Okay, so we beat the Syrian Greeks, and then what happens? We come to the Beis HaMikdash, and what? And what? And what? See, here's what's interesting about the story, is everyone skips to the part that we couldn't find the oil. But there's a whole, you look at Medrash Chanukah, there's a whole other part. The Medrash Chanukah describes how the Chashmonaim, who are also the Kohanim, walked into the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was in complete and utter array. The Medrash writes that there were slaughtered carcasses of chazirim, of pigs on the floor. They used it for idolatrous sacrifice. You know, we talk about the oil, there wasn't oil, there was also something else missing. You know what else was missing in the Beis HaMikdash? The menorah. The menorah also wasn't there, right? The menorah was solid gold. It was taken away by the Greeks. The Gemara Maseches Menachos says that for the first year they fashioned the menorah out of their spears. Then they got a little bit of money out of tin, then out of brass, out of copper, out of silver. Then it was a number of years until it was gold. So they walk into the Beis HaMikdash and it's total, utter array. And they begin sifting through all of the rubble. Everything looks wrecked. And what do they find? One little untainted cruse of oil. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Kook, highlight the same idea. That is the metaphor for the human condition. How many of us are a wrecked Beis HaMikdash? Don't raise your hand. Right? How many of us are in just a profound state of disrepair? And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, oh, so happy he's not talking to me, right? I'm good. I'm sorry to say, then you're even in more disrepair than you even let yourself know. We're all in a profound state of disrepair. And by the way, that's not even because of anything bad we did. That's just the nature of the human condition, to be in a state of disrepair. You know what makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu so great? That he's in a constant state of perfection. So unless you're HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by definition, you're imperfect and in a state of disrepair. And sometimes I look at my personal mikdash and I'm so deflated and I'm so upset and I'm so disappointed and I'm so overwhelmed sometimes by the enormity of the poor decisions I've made, the bad behaviors I engage in, the wrong turns I have made that I feel I just can't navigate out of, and I feel like I'm done. My Beis HaMikdash is in ruin. But then something amazing happens, which is, if I find the courage to sift through the rubble, do you know what you find? You find that little jug of untainted oil, the shemen. The Rebbe says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, that shemen, Rav Kook says the same thing, that shemen, that represents power that you have, that you never even knew. Power that you possess, that you never even imagined you could really access, and it's there. And in this incredible sea of personalistic disrepair, there is this incredible and overwhelming jug of ridiculous personal energy. And if I just find the courage, you see, you have to understand something. When the Chashmonaim found that jug of oil, that's not the end of the story. Remember, I know when I was a kid, they used to have these books, the Choose Your Own Adventure books. I don't remember those books. Right? It's like reading a book. It's like turn to page 24 if you want Johnny to go right. I'm sorry, Chaim Yankel to go right. Right, Chaim Yankel to go left. You know, they had those. So when the Chashmonaim found that cruse of oil, there was a choice. What was the choice? You know, we know the story. So of course, they popped it open, they lit it, it remained lit. They could have just as easily said, forget it. Forget it. What good is one little jug of oil going to do in this overwhelming sea of disrepair? And they could have just put it back down and walked right back out. But they didn't. They decided to open up the seal. They decided to open up the oil. And they decided to kindle something that they did not know was going to rage as brightly as it did. Remember again, when they lit the menorah, what did they assume? They assumed it was going to remain lit for however long, whatever, one day, and that was it. And we'd be right back where we started. They had no idea, of course, the miracle that was going to occur. And this, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this says Rav Kook, is the powerful personal metaphor of Chanukah. The Chashmonaim had the koach to walk into a sea of disrepair, dig down deep through the rubble, find one last untainted pocket or jug of energy. and they were able to utilize it to create a spark, and that spark became a raging fire. And says Lubavitch, says Rav Kook, this becomes the avoda for us as well. Is that the avoda of the Yom Tov of Chanukah is number one, acknowledge and embrace. We've been talking about a lot about leaning into and accepting things over the last couple of weeks. Acknowledging and embracing and leaning into my own personal disrepair. We spend so much time and energy trying to convince ourselves that we're not broken, right? And it's great because it's fascinating to see. Why? Because I'm not broken. But you know who is broken? You know who is broken? All of you, right? Everyone else is, I'm the normal person, right? I'm the one who's got it all together. It's everyone else who's broken. Instead of recognizing that's usually not how life works, right? If you're the one who's always having the problem, chances are it's you, and it's okay. We spend so much time running away from our brokenness instead of accepting that, yeah, of course I'm broken. I'm a human being, not because I'm bad, not because I'm underperforming, but because such is the nature of the human condition. And so if on Chanukah, I embrace the fact that often my personal Beis HaMikdash is in a state of disrepair. It is. There's a lot of things in life that may be in disrepair. We may have relationships that are in disrepair. We have midos that are in disrepair. We have behaviors that are in disrepair. We have personality traits that are in disrepair. Okay, we're human beings. That's the way it works. Embrace it, lean into it, and then dig through the rubble and find that jug of oil. Find that untapped reservoir of personalistic energy and decide that you're going to change yourself, and decide that you're going to change your life, and decide that you want things to be different going forward. If the Chashmonaim would have simply walked into the Beis HaMikdash, seen the overwhelming state of disrepair, and they could have just turned around. I often think to myself, I would have turned around. I would have been too overwhelmed by what I saw and just would have turned around, but they didn't. That's why they're the Chashmonaim. They didn't. Instead, they sifted through the rubble. They found the one little jug of wine. It says Lubavitch Rebbe, this is the power of Chanukah. Chanukah is not a Yom Tov of Seudah, because what does Seudah represent? What is Seudah? Seudah represents Lechem, Mayim, and Yayin. Those are the more revealed parts of our persona, right? Lechem u'Mayim, the objectively, right, water and bread, the more objectively observable parts of our personality. Yayin, wine, maybe the parts of our personality that are a little bit hidden, but really easily discoverable. Those are the rest of the Yom Tovim. Chanukah is not about any of that. Chanukah is about oil. Chanukah is about shemen. Chanukah is about reaching deep into ourselves to find that untapped jug of energy, to find that untapped reservoir of personalistic power. But here's what's incredible. What's incredible is if you look, by the way, if you go back to number 1 for just a moment, if you go back to number 1, you'll notice something interesting. The way the Gemara is worded is as follows. The Gemara, it's in source number 1, 4 lines down, right? The Gemara is describing over the Chashmonaim walked into the Beis HaMikdash. And there's one pivotal word here that is so important that makes the entire story, right? The Gemara says, the Chashmonaim came back into the Beis HaMikdash, and what did they do? Third line down, first word on the line, Badku. They searched. You can't find the personalistic oil unless you search. You may say to yourself, I've looked, I've really looked, I've looked everywhere. I cannot find my personal cruise of oil. I can't find that pocket of untapped energy. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I tried it, I looked everywhere, I couldn't find it. So it's interesting, there's a Gemara in source number 7. The Gemara Maseches Megillah says, such a beautiful Gemara. Rabbi Yitzchak says, this is one of my favorite Gemaras. If a person will tell you, Yagati v'lo matzasi, al tamin. If a person says, I tried very hard to accomplish something, but I was unsuccessful, don't believe them. Person says, Lo yagati u'matzasi, I didn't try hard, but yet I became incredibly successful, al tamin. Don't believe them. Yagati u'matzasi, but if a person says, I tried really hard, and I found what I was looking for, tamin, believe it. And the Gemara gives an interesting qualifier. It says, Hani mili b'divrei Torah. This is talking about spirituality, not talking about money, right? Why? Because money, some people just fall into money, right? Without working so hard. And some people work really hard and just can't find financial success. So leaving aside financial matters, in the world of spirituality, if someone tells you, I tried really hard, but I was unsuccessful, do not believe them. It's false. It's not true. You didn't try hard enough. If a person says, I didn't try hard, but I was spiritually successful, don't believe them either. Because there is no spiritual success without incredible effort. But if a person says, and here's the mantra, this is a bumper sticker, right? Here's the mantra, Yagati umatsasi tamin. Person says, I worked really hard and I found what I was looking for, believe them. That's the chashon, that's badku. Badku. If you want your oil, if you want to dig down deep into that reservoir of personalistic power, and you want to access that koach, that jug, right? That jug of person that is sitting inside of you, that is ready to be opened, that is ready to be utilized, you're only going to find it if you work hard to excavate it. Because I have to get through multiple layers of rubble in order to be, and if you say, I tried, I didn't find it, you didn't try hard enough. And if you claim that you found it and you didn't really have to work hard at it, then it's not really the jug of oil that you found. You found something else. But if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to put in the effort, then Chanukah tells us there is a jug of oil waiting for each of us. And this, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is the essence of Chanukah. Now we come full circle. And now we understand that as great as the Yom Tov of Chanukah is, there is no mitzvah of Suda. Because Su'uda corresponds to the revealed aspects of our persona. Su'uda, a meal which again is comprised of lechem, yayin, mayim, or lechem, mayim, yayin, bread, water, wine, where they're all revealed parts of who and what we are. That's other Yom Tovim. Chanukah is nothing to do with bread, water, and wine. Chanukah is oil. And oil is that kind of thing where by itself, you don't know exactly what to do with it. But once you discover it and you open up that personalistic jug of profound power, it enhances all the other aspects of my life. And the Rebbe goes on, the Rebbe says something really amazing. You know, in the world of change, often like there are different change models that exist in life. And sometimes, conventional wisdom is, don't always try to affect change by attacking your biggest problems. Right? We all have like big problems and little problems. So there's there is a wisdom in saying, you know what? Tackle the little ones, rack up some life wins, and that'll give you the confidence, right? Like the boost to be able to tackle the big things. And there is a tremendous amount of profundity in that. But I think what the Rebbe is teaching us is something incredible. Chanukah is the time to tackle your biggest challenges. Chanukah is not the time for the small stuff. Chanukah is the time to go big or go home. Chanukah is the opportunity to go ahead and say, you know what? I would assume that many of us are in the same boat. You come to Rosh Hashanah, you come to Yom Kippur, right? I'm not going to take a show of hands, but I would venture to say that most of us don't have new Averos year to year. Right? We don't really have new Averos. It's not like, Tavshin Pei Dalet, listen, I dabbled in a lot of new stuff that year, right? So really it's like, I don't know, at least I find for myself, it's the same Averos, year in and year out. They might manifest themselves in different ways, but it's the same core issues that present themselves over and over and over. Why is that? So it's simple, because I haven't tackled them. I just haven't tackled them. Often it's just because I'm not brave enough, and I'm not strong enough, and I'm not confident enough to go after the big ones. So I'll tackle the little ones, right? And this is why often, by the way, when it comes to change, which part of change do we often get lost in? When it comes to change, we often focus on the positive things, right? I'm going to say Nishmas 27 times in 3 minutes, right? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say all of Sefer Tehillim, 14 times in a half a day. Those are the things. Or I'm going to start learning this one, which are all beautiful. You say Nishmas as many times as you can. It's fantastic, right? But we always gravitate towards those things. Why? Because it allows us to feel like we're affecting change without actually having to affect change. And so that's why we often find ourselves mired in the same stuff, year in and year out, decade in and decade out. So that when I'm in my 40s, how come I'm clapping al chait for the same stuff that I was doing in my 20s? Okay, the behaviors change a little bit differently, right? They manifest as, But it's the same core issues. Why? Because I haven't tackled a lot of the core issues. Says the Rebbe. Chanukah offers us the opportunity to not just do a little something here, a little something there, to not just a little bit more light here, a little bit more light there. Chanukah is walk into the rubble of yourself. Walk into your rubble. Stop running from it. Just confront it. Confront your rubble. Walk into your rubble. Walk into your personal Beis HaMikdash. And it's hard because for many of us, when we walk into our personal Beis HaMikdash, it's overwhelming to see what a state of disrepair. It's overwhelming and shocking to see sometimes what's happened to what once was such a beautiful structure. But here's the incredible part. If you're willing to do the work and you're willing to search inside of yourself, Chanukah gives us the opportunity to find the shemen. It gives us the opportunity to go ahead and literally find that oil that is contained within, that cruise of personalistic power that exists inside each of us. It is here for the taking on Chanukah. And if you could find it, but you have to be willing to matzah, badak, you have to yabiyagea, you have to be willing to exert yourself, you have to be willing to go through rubble, sift through the rubble, do a real personal inventory, confront a little bit of the disrepair in my life. If you're willing to do that, sift through the rubble, I will find the jug of oil. And when I open the seal of that oil, and I take in that oil is not great by itself, but what it does is it changes everything else in your life. This is Chanukah. Chanukah is not about Seudah. It's not about lechem, mayim, and yayin. It's all about oil. It's all about shemen. And perhaps this is our avodah. Come tomorrow night. We're going to stand in front of the Neiros. And I think a lot of times when we stand by the menorah, it's not clear what it is that we're supposed to do. Right? We say the brachas, sing Haneros Halalo, Ma'osur. Now what? Okay, it's beautiful. And again, you play dreidel or, whatever else anybody's. Like, what is the avoda? And the avoda of Chanukah is to spend a little bit of time in silence, just looking at the Neiros, just looking at the candles. And what am I doing when I look in the candles? With your eyes open, your eyes closed, whichever way works better for you. And just imagine you're walking into your personal Beis HaMikdash. You're a Chashbonah, you're a Maccabi, and you're walking into your own personal Beis HaMikdash. And for those couple of moments, don't talk and don't interact and don't engage. I know what you're thinking, such a man thing to say, right? And just be with yourself in those moments by the candles, and enter into your mikdash. And it may be scary, and it may be overwhelming, but then start to dig through the rubble. Okay, there's this rubble, there's this life mistake, there's this wrong turns, there's this decade that was really not good, right? There's this relationship that just was so toxic and negative. There was this behavior that really brought me down. There's this midah, there's this trait that just undermines my personal growth. Okay, just go through the rubble. Just keep sifting through the rubble. And if you're willing to go into it, you're willing to walk in, you're willing to sift through the rubble, you'll find your pach shemen. You'll find your jug of oil. And when you find that jug of personal power and you open it up, you will find the koach to affect comprehensive, cathartic life change. And this power it's accessible all year round. The ability is always accessible, but it's never as accessible as it is on the Yom Tov of Chanukah. The ability to sift through the rubble like the Chashmonaim did, and to find our personal cruise of oil, open it up, and use that energy to affect change. I'm so tired of running from my Beis HaMikdash. I'm so tired of running from the ruins. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to walk into it. I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to dig through it. I'm going to find my pach shemen. I'm going to find my oil, and I am going to affect change in my life. It's what our ancestors did thousands of years ago, and it is the sacred avodah that we have starting tomorrow night for the following 8 nights afterwards. And if you don't get it right the first night, Baruch Hashem, there's an opportunity multiple times. And maybe for many of us, night number 1, I'm going to walk into my Beis HaMikdash. It's a little bit overwhelming, so I'm going to walk right out. And night number 2, I'll walk in a little bit more. And night number 3, a little bit more. As long as by the end of Chanukah, you found the courage to sift through the rubble, find your personal oil, that's a successful Yom Tov. And if we could each do that as individuals, go through our rubble, find our personal oil. That is the key to Geula for Klal Yisrael. We need nisim v'niflos. We really do. Klal Yisrael needs miracles. And the Yom Tov of Chanukah is a time that is auspicious and ripe for miracles. Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi writes, we say in the bracha, Sha'asa nisim lavosenu b'yamim ahim bazman hazeh. So often we translate that to mean Hashem did miracles for us in those days, in this time. In this time we assume it means like the calendrical date, the 25th of Nisan. But the Rebbe says something so beautiful. The Rebbe says, Hashem did miracles for our ancestors historically, bazman hazeh. But this time, now, today, tomorrow, is ripe for miraculous activity. And don't we need miracles? Don't we need miracles? Close to 450 days, our brothers and sisters held in captivity. Hundreds of our precious young men and women, holy soldiers, giving their lives at the Mizbeach of Kiddush Hashem. Am Yisrael still waging wars on multiple fronts. We get used to things because it's been over a year. So a little bit of like the shock and awe has worn off. And this reality of Klal Yisrael has become our new reality. Kind of just accept it and go on with it. And that's human nature. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us those coping mechanisms. But it is so incredibly important that for many of us, we've never lived through a time in which we need greater miraculous intervention than in this current time in which we are living. But the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu works is the Ribbon Shalom mirrors our activity. The Baal Shem Tov says, Hashem tzilcha. So we often translate Hashem tzilcha as Hashem is your shadow. Hashem is your shade. The Baal Shem Tov says it means Hashem is your shadow. What does your shadow do? What does your shadow do? Whatever you do is what your shadow does. If you want something miraculous from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then do something miraculous first. Do something miraculous. And there is no greater miracle that exists in this universe than our ability to change. Change is the greatest miracle that exists in this universe. And so if I want miraculous intervention from the Ribono Shel Olam, then I need to model that behavior and create some miraculous change within my own life as well. If we could just find the courage to discover, to sift through the debris and find our personal oil, open up the door to real cathartic change, sift through the rubble and really rebuild and rededicate our personal Beis HaMikdash and perform that personal miracle for ourselves, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have no choice but to perform miracles for our people as well. Should be Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to soak in the full light and radiance of the menorah. Should be Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to each of us in our own way to find our beautiful cruse of oil, to find that jug of personal potential. We should be Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to find the courage to sift through it, to find it, to open it up, to utilize it, to add it, to sprinkle it on the rest of our life. We should be Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to enter into Chanukah as one kind of person, and Me'eretz Hashem emerge on the other end as the best version of ourselves. And in that zechus, in the zechus of that personal miracle of change, may this truly be a Yom Tov of incredible nisim and niflos for Klal Yisrael. May we Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to see all of our hostages come home. May we Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to see all of our holy soldiers successful b'chol ma'aseh yadayim. May we Zocheh Me'eretz Hashem to see the rededication of our third Beis HaMikdash and a rebuilt Yerushalayim with the Melech HaMashiach here Rabbi Aminu. Amen. Amen.